So let's wrap up this 1942 Indo-Pacific things we can get on with other stuff. All right. So we left off with the Doolittle raid in April. Said militarily it's insignificant as far as the amount of damage done, but it's a big psychological boost for the Americans, and it kind of gives the Japanese a black eye. Okay, because they think, oh, we're invulnerable, and now all of a sudden, bombs are falling on their cities. I'm like, going, well, dang, that's not good. Okay. And like I said, the Doolittle raid was April 18th. So, just maybe shortly after Krugador fell, or maybe just before, about the same time, really. All right. So, what's next? All right. So, get my trusty pen here. All right. So, the Philippines are sewn up. The Japanese have taken care of the American forces in that area. Womp, womp. Next on their agenda is after, they've pretty much gained everything they were seeking to do in the initial onslaught. They've done so well, they said, well, we need to come up with some more ideas. Okay? And one was to launch an invasion down into this area. They were going for a place, if I recall, they were going to Port Moresby, which is not on this map. Okay? But they're going to send a naval task force down to try to gather some more strong points. And they will run into an American naval force in this is in May. Don't ask me the exact date. You can Google it if you want to know. It's on Wiki. But here, see where it says Coral Sea? Okay. The Japanese send a naval task force. It's like 2 of their big carriers that have been used to attack Pearl Harbor. They had attacked Pearl Harbor with 6 carriers. They send 2 of them down into this area. Okay? And they run into an American task force, okay, consisting of aircraft carriers. And the 2 sides fight a battle called the Battle of the Coral Sea. Okay? Now, the Battle of the Coral Sea is kind of a tactical draw. We lose a carrier, the Japanese lose a small carrier, but a couple of their carriers get damaged. A bunch of pilots are shot down. But strategically, it's a win for the United States in that they defeat the Japanese invasion attempt is aborted. Okay, so the Japanese won't go through their plans of attacking Port Moresby, which I think was where they were going. This is what happens when you do it all from memory. So I would put that on the test because it's not important. Well, it's important, but I just don't remember the exact details. I don't feel like looking them up right now. Because what I'm trying to get to is the Battle of Midway, which is really important. So the Japanese, actually went past the map trying to do the erasing. Japanese have their eyes set on Midway. Okay, the fact that the Americans have bombed Japan suggests that the Americans are not out of the fight. So they decide to attack Midway Island using the other 4 aircraft carriers that attacked Pearl Harbor. Now, Midway Island, if I had the map in front of me, is it's like the very tail end of a Hawaiian island chain. It's technically part of Hawaiian Islands, but it's way, way out on the far fringes. Okay, and as you can see in this illustration here, it's actually 2 islands, and here's an airstrip. Okay, so this is another one of these postage stamp islands. It's just big enough for an air base, and then there's support facilities over on the littler island. Okay. The Japanese plan is this: we'll attack Midway, okay? We'll invade Midway. Okay. If we capture Midway Island, then we can use it as an air base to continue harassing Pearl Harbor because Midway is within air range of Pearl Harbor. Okay. The real plan is, though, okay, is that because of this, the United States Navy will have no choice but to try to defend Midway Island. They can't just let it go like they did Wake Island. They'll have to come out and fight for Midway. Okay? So the Japanese intend to attack Midway, and then when the U.S. Navy attack Midway, capture Midway. When the American Navy comes out, sink what's left of our aircraft carriers, and finally drive a stake through the heart of the United States Navy. Now, there's just one problem. Unknowns to the Japanese, naval code breakers have broken the Imperial Navy Japanese code. Okay? Kind of like we'd broken the Japanese diplomatic codes prior to Pearl Harbor, we've now broken the Japanese Imperial Navy codes. And we know that they're coming for Midway. Yeah? And so the U.S. Navy is laying in wait in ambush when the Japanese if the Japanese figure they'll show up, attack Midway, then the Americans will come out to defend it. Yeah? We're already there. And in early June 1942, 4th, 5th, and 6th of May, the Americans fight this decisive Battle of Midway out in the Pacific. Okay? Now, I could do 30 minutes on the Battle of Midway, but we won't because it's a survey class and you don't need to know that. Suffice to say, the Americans score a big victory. I do have a couple of pictures here. Okay? We have 3 carriers. The Japanese have 4. Okay? Planes go back and forth. Lots of really dramatic stuff going. There was a movie out about it last year, but I didn't go see because the previews just looked like they would make me bang my head against the wall. Just suffice to say, at the end of the battle, we have sunk all 4 of the Japanese aircraft carriers. They have sunk one of ours. Okay? All right. This is a big deal. Okay? This will restore the balance of power in the Pacific. Okay? The Japanese can't really afford to lose 4 aircraft carriers. We really can't afford to lose the 1, but we can build more because we're an industrial juggernaut. Okay? Okay? The U.S. by the end of the war will have built dozens of aircraft carriers, and the Japanese have built like a handful. We can outproduce these guys every day of the week. We have the resources, we have the machinery, we have the industrial thing to do. So the Battle of Midway is the turning point in the Pacific War. Not because after Midway we're winning, but up to Midway we were losing. The Japanese were on the march. And now after Midway it kind of resets. It's kind of like a reboot. It sets everything back equal again, back to an even footing. If you have an even footing, then in the long term this will be on the side of the United States. We have more manpower, we have more industrial power. Okay? So Midway is a big deal. After that, the Japanese were no longer on the big strategic offensive. Okay? Instead, the Americans will start to go on the offensive, and this will be the last thing we'll talk about in the Pacific for this section. Okay? Here's one of the Japanese carriers burning the day after it was bombed on June 4th. Okay, we had a slight technical glitch here, so it might be a hiccup in the narration. I don't want to go back and redo the whole thing for just this last slide. Okay, so if there was some incoherent babbling a minute ago, well, isn't the whole course been kind of like that? Let me get my pen working here. All right. Here is Midway. Here's Pearl Harbor. See, I told you that Midway was part of a Hawaiian island chain. People don't believe me when I tell them that. Trust me. I'm a trained professional history smart guy. Okay? All right. When we finally go on the offensive against the Japanese, our first real offensive, I mean, we've done a few bombing strikes here, like Doolittle Raid. The first time we actually try to do something major is at a place called Guadalcanal, which is down here, and it's really hard to see on the map. Okay? So I'm going to put a big circle around it. Guadalcanal is an island. Okay? Now, the Japanese are building an air base on Guadalcanal. Okay? An air base on Guadalcanal threatens the line of communications between Pearl Harbor and Australia. Okay? All right, so the Japanese on Guadalcanal could interfere with shipping going into Australia. We really don't want Guadalcanal, to be honest, but we can't let the Japanese have it. So in August of 1942, the United States Marines will land on Guadalcanal in an effort to seize the airfield before it's finished. Okay? Now, the Japanese react negatively. They counterattack. They sink the cruiser force that is protecting the cargo ships have dropped off the Marines. The cargo ships have to pull out because they're just like defenseless, leaving the Marines stranded on Guadalcanal. But they have managed to gain the airstrip. And this was in August. What's going to happen for the rest of 1942, and this is what's going on in 1942 in the Pacific for like the last 4 months, is all centered on Guadalcanal. Okay? The Americans have the airstrips. They kind of command the sea around Guadalcanal during the day. Okay? But the airplanes can't fly effectively at night. These are much more primitive airplanes. So at night, the Japanese Navy brings in supplies. So you get this thing where, like, during the day, the Americans are trying to pour reinforcements into Guadalcanal. At night, it's like shift change. The Japanese Navy shows up. And they try to bring in reinforcements into Guadalcanal. And this goes on for a few months, for the rest of 1942, as both sides pour men and resources into this island. Okay? And there's a series of naval engagements fought in and around the waters of Guadalcanal, at least 3 separate ones that I can think of, maybe 4, okay? And then some minor engagements. Some of these are nasty, brutish, point-blank range, middle of the night, barroom brawl, every man for himself type fights with battleships and cruisers. But you don't need to know that. It's a survey class. But this is what's going on in 1942 in the Pacific from August through the end of the year. And Guadalcanal is finally declared secured by the Americans like in January of 43. Okay? So this is what's happened in 1942 in the Pacific. The Japanese have advanced out to this red line that you see around the map. Okay? We've managed to give a decisive victory in a naval battle at the Battle of Midway in May, thus stopping the Japanese, roll basically. And then in August, we go on a limited small-scale offensive at Guadalcanal, and then, like I said, spent the rest of 1942 fighting with the Japanese over this island that nobody really wants, to be honest, but you want the airfield. It's the only reason Guadalcanal has any value is the airfield. So that'll take us into 1943, which is where Lecture 13 actually picks up, is at the beginning of 1943. But I need to spend a little time talking about that other half of the world. We've been focusing on the Pacific. We'll go talk about the Atlantic for a little while before we switch over to Lecture 13. So buckle up and hang on. It's a bumpy ride.